Welcome back to the show. My name is Michael Lin, and this is the MongoDB podcast. Today on the show, an incredibly fascinating topic at the intersection of artificial intelligence and database technology. Our guest today is Alex Tushynski, co-founder of Arc53, a company that's been making waves in the predictive AI ML space since its founding in 2019. Arc53 has been instrumental in developing solutions that span a broad spectrum, from recommendation engines to fraud detection systems. But the landscape of AI took a dramatic turn with the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT in November of 2022, marking a pivotal moment in the industry. Alex and his team at Arc53 quickly recognized the shift toward generative AI and the new challenges it brought along. Developers and data teams found themselves in uncharted waters, tasked with integrating their proprietary data with generative AI models, a concept now known as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. This shift demanded new skills and disciplines as teams had to navigate the complexities of merging various data sources such as databases, data lakes, file systems, and search engines to feed into cutting-edge vector stores. Identifying this critical opportunity to simplify this burgeoning complexity for developers, Arc53 set out to create DocsGPT. Today, Alex is here to share the journey of Arc53, the genesis of DocsGPT, and how MongoDB played a pivotal role in this evolution. Let's welcome Alex to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here as well. It's interesting to come here to then talk about the generative AI, our journey with DocsGPT, and maybe cover some interesting points that people would be interested in as well.
Yeah. So we'll just have a conversation. I'm really curious about that pivotal moment when OpenAI launched ChatGPT. What were you thinking, and how long did it take you to think about the next step and creating DocsGPT?
That launch was truly a pivotal moment, which did show people that generative AI is capable of reasoning, essentially. And even before that, we were playing with simpler GPT models, and they were giving us a promise of some sort of reasoning, but we're still quite far away from it. And once ChatGPT launched in November 2022, we realized that incredible wealth of tools can be built on top of it. It's the new wave comparable to internet or databases that are hosted. So we thought that there are some limitations like knowledge and groundedness to that knowledge. And we were personally using it to try and ask some questions about code, which was fascinating because it would answer a lot of the time quite well, and it would help out, and it would actually be beneficial. But what would miss is that sometimes you want to ask a question about a specific version of some library like Pandas or even PyMongo, but it wouldn't be able to answer specific questions about specific versions because it's not really grounded. And that's when we thought that we can use RAG to just ground it to that specific version of a specific library that we're using and actually get beneficial answers there. So that's how actually DocsGPT started as this internal tool. We had a CLI for it. And then we decided to put the neat front end up on it and just publish it. And we actually didn't expect it to get as popular as it did.
So a GPT assistant is only as good as the information that you feed it as the knowledge base, right? So I'm imagining that the initial implementation probably was fairly sparse.
Essentially. And I would say that the GPT assistant as an idea, it's actually the time is when it actually was deployed as a demo for the first time is actually back last year around February is when we open sourced it and showed the demo. But there have been many ideas walking around minds of many people in the industry of applying retrieval augmented generation and business. And slowly, that information that the model would use to answer questions grew, and ease of integration grew. And now you have extremely productized solutions that make it very, very easy to go through the whole process.
Yeah. So when a customer of yours chooses to implement DocsGPT, they're walking through the entire process of providing that grounded information, and it's based on documentation, right? So as a developer today, I'll visit MongoDB Docs, for example, and I'll search. Maybe there'll be a search bar. I'll search for specific keywords or operators, and I'll find the answers, but I've got to read through a lot of information that has nothing to do with what I'm looking for. When a customer of yours implements DocsGPT, they're essentially providing those bits of documentation, and what they get is a command line, an interface that enables users to interact with that documentation in a much different way. Is that correct?
Precisely. It's really helpful to have conversations with documentation for developers. And then eventually we grew to adapt to different sources of documentation, to any documentation, and essentially. But that's the main premise, is to allow to have this assistant, a GPT model that is grounded in a certain truth and does not hallucinate about anything that does not exist within the space. So I think when ChatGPT even came out, most people criticized it for hallucinations and ability to creatively answer questions and imagine things that are not there, for example. But that's kind of the problem that DocsGPT as a problem is trying to solve, is ensuring that it's just grounded in truth, and make sure we also solve it efficiently and open source way.
Yeah. OpenAI and ChatGPT took the world by storm, and there's a lot of fear associated with how popular that is. Like, is it going to take my job? Is it going to obviate the need for me to even write code? Like, is it going to take over the world? Like, what are your thoughts on the popularity of OpenAI and ChatGPT?
I think there's a process that has been triggered where people are now taking the AGI, the general intelligence, seriously because of it. I don't think people would have taken it as seriously even 2.5 years ago. But now this demand shifts, and it understands that, a lot of menial processes, a lot of simple questions and answers, a lot of tasks that are just boring could be automated, and they're being automated as we speak. But primarily, I think what happened, especially in the last year, is productivity grew. Mostly of developers, because developers were first people to adopt this technology. But in general, we saw results from Copilots in general of how it boosts productivity. We see results with our customers where users are engaging more with documentation instead of asking and reiterating questions on Slack and emailing people things that could be easily solved by reading a little bit more. But because it's a tedious process, and AI can step in and help people out with this tediousness, it really boosts their performance. But in future, there's obviously a question of if we have such big performance gains, maybe we don't need as many people working on certain things. Or if we have such a good way of automating certain functions, maybe certain people will lose jobs. And I think with that question, it's really hard to answer when that's going to happen. But we all know there's going to be a day when things like this will start happening more and more.
Yeah. So there's a risk associated with investing in a company like OpenAI. OpenAI is not an open system. It's a bit of a black box. What's your approach to building DocsGPT in respect to proprietary software?
Since the beginning, we decided to take the open source approach. And the logic behind it was that when we did come up with DocsGPT, when we did implement it and publish it, we were the first people who did it. But we also realized that a RAG essentially is going to be a central approach for many organizations in future. And just like with databases, I believe the open source ones will win in a long-term run. And that's kind of the strategy we decided to copy from MongoDB, because we strongly believe that open source will win in a long-term perspective. If you look at models that are being released every day, and today we got a release from Google, by the way, with their new open source model, which is just proving my point even more. There's Meta publishing their open source models, Mistral publishing incredible models, and Google now stepping into the game and publishing incredible models. What are the chances of people that will continue using those large proprietary models and adapting their systems to those models when it just introduces risks with security, with privacy? I think long term, it's really important to have at least an open source offering.
Yeah, so you've got a dual approach to monetization. I noticed that DocsGPT is open source. It's very popular on GitHub. I think there's something like 14,000 stars on the project itself.
Yeah, just 2 stars off, I think.
Okay. Well, congratulations. I mean, that's quite incredible. And you mentioned MongoDB. You're leveraging MongoDB as a part of your stack. Can you talk a little bit about how you're leveraging MongoDB?
I think there are 2 ways in which we have to speak about the way we leverage it. The first way we are leveraging it is application layer storage. Is where we store user data, user history, the mapping to their vectors. And the second way in which we're leveraging it is a vector store. Initially, we were using Faiz, which is old Facebook's vector search file engine thing. And obviously, storing things in a file is not a scalable approach. But that's something we did initially, and something that I think is great for just a simple proof of concept situation. But once you have to productionize things, we started using the Atlas vector search to ensure that we can distribute our vectors and make sure that we can scale our infrastructure without having any issues.
Yeah. So scalability, and are there other reasons why you chose MongoDB over other solutions?
First of all, again, I really appreciate the open source first approach in general. And when you are building and prototyping things, it is important to be flexible. And that's, again, the kind of flexibility that is not offered by proprietary solutions where even if you use LLM models that are proprietary, it's not flexible. I can't host it on my personal device. I can't deploy it on small scale infrastructure on any cloud that I choose. But that's the kind of offering you get with open source solutions in general. And with MongoDB, it's obviously great because our developers could prototype this application layer storage immediately. And also having a NoSQL database is just extra easy for developers to use. It doesn't have the complicated extra steps of migrating data and preparing the data tables and everything like this. It's just working out of the box in the simplest way possible.
Yeah, I certainly enjoy the flexibility. And one of the things that some other folks have noted about MongoDB, specifically around vectors and vector search, is the ability to store multiple versions of your embeddings right in the same model. Are you leveraging that approach?
Yeah, that was an important reason for us to actually move from Elasticsearch. Initially, we implemented that solution as a vector store because as good as it is, it was very, very important for us to do A/B testing with the embeddings. And I think embeddings are extremely important for anyone who is doing RAG in general. I think whoever is listening to this podcast, I hope that what they take out from this conversation is that in RAG, embeddings are extremely important. And because they're so important, you will be changing them a lot. And if you upgrade them, let's say from MPNet embeddings to BGE embeddings and then to UAE embeddings, just constantly there's a barrage of new embeddings models on empty bench leaderboard for embeddings, and you will have to upgrade them frequently. So it's important that you make your system as compatible to those upgrades as possible. If it's hard for you to upgrade it, that means you're going to have a lot of trouble in future. And another reason for changing and swapping out embeddings is if you fine-tune them. It's another thing you can fine-tune, just like a model. You can fine-tune embeddings in your data set. And in MongoDB, it's easy to do A/B testing because you can basically have one collection of documents and you can put two indexes on top of it. And you can use those both indexes at the same time. And essentially that allows you to have easy A/B tests. Instead of creating a separate collection, instead of taking down your collection or index for a little bit for maintenance, you can easily include new indexes without impacting old indexes. It just works seamlessly, and that seamlessness is what drives the ease of A/B testing.
Yeah. So I can't name a company that's not looking at developing some type of AI functionality in their application suite. I mean, literally every company's got something in at least prototype stage. That's a vastly different story, prototyping in pre-production versus like launching something out on the internet and giving access to it to the world. Like, how did you ensure that it was going to be able to scale, and what's it like to run an AI application in production today?
Yeah, I think stories where people actually run AI in production are very scarce because number one, most of the applications are simple prototypes. Most of the tools have not thought through the amount of work that needs to be done for actual product and making sure that it works well for many users. And there are many considerations. I think the first and one of the most important considerations is the data that you're using private? Is it confidential? Do you want to leak it to a third party that you're not aware of how they're going to use that data? If their policy says that they will fine-tune on top of your data in future, are you okay with this? Are you aware that that's going to happen? So it's extremely important for any production system to actually consider privacy and security. So if you're a serious organization or a serious government, you will obviously consider security as the first and most important point in your deployment. Another thing that we consider when productionizing is benchmarking. I think this is the most critical thing for deploying tools in production. Is you have to have benchmark for everything, for dangerous prompts, dangerous responses, for retrieval, for your model. So you have to control for all of those moving elements inside of your RAG pipeline. Because when we say deploying AI in organization, it's not just random AI with random knowledge. Most of the time, that AI will have to be grounded in information that's available inside that organization, and try to make sure that it's grounded and does not talk about other things and does not confuse its users. So it will probably be a RAG pipeline of sorts. And you have to measure and benchmark every single step of this RAG pipeline, including embeddings. You have to ensure that that retrieval works perfectly well. And you can have a measurable way to understand if you, let's say, upgraded your retrieval. Did it improve or did it not? And that's a very useful thing to have. And finally, for production, it's also important to merge into the existing workflow of the systems that you have around. RAG pipelines don't usually exist on their own. You usually have a source of data that it will be using. It will have a cloud or on-premise servers that it will be using. So it's important to consider how your application can be deployed in those environments and make sure that there is as little friction as possible.
So what does the pipeline to production look like for a customer of DocsGPT? As documentation is updated, as sources of information is updated, do you have guidance for folks that are implementing DocsGPT?
I think the first step, even before we sign anyone on, even before we agree to get a new customer, is a negotiation part. And in that part, they're trying to understand your tool and trying to understand how it works. And primarily, they're trying to understand it is because they're concerned about security. They're concerned about any data leaking to any other third party. So it's important to show them a proof that it is possible to deploy it in a safe and secure manner. And the next thing that we usually talk about is the source of data that they want to use. And we will try to pick first simple source of data, which is some good documentation, high quality documentation, and then try and play around with it a little bit, get some feedback from their users. And then we will create our first benchmarks, and all that those benchmarks will be improved upon in future, and we'll make sure that our model just gets fine-tuned and more aligned with the ethics of the company, with the way they want it to respond, and many other things. That's another advantage of having your own models, because when you fine-tune it, you don't pay extra costs for deploying it, because you're already paying the whole cost for deploying it. In any case, it doesn't matter if it's tuned or not.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the revenue model and how customers pay?
Our model consists, I think, of it separates into 3 different ways, and I think soon we will separate it into 4 different ways, because the generative AI and AI in business is just such a new thing, and there's so many ways you can use it. You can use it as a customer-facing tool that responds to customer queries. You can use it as an internal chatbot that just helps developers or helps salespeople. And because of it, we have currently 3 approaches, which is the B2C approach. Is any user can go to our demo, register there, play around with it for free. They can pay for a pro subscription to use more expensive models. Second approach will be B2B commercial open source SaaS deployment, where we basically manage their deployment, allow them to register their users, allow them to integrate it with their SAML, and so on. And the third option is for enterprises who usually want to deploy everything on premises, and there we will agree to have a fixed proof of concept, and then deploy it on a certain data source. And then from there, we will try to productize it internally and make sure that that organization can deploy everything on their premises, essentially. And the fourth way, which we're going to add in the coming month, is API access, where basically it's similar to B2B SaaS, but way more self-service. Because some B2B SaaS, they really want a lot more support, where you need to help them with widgets, where you need to help them with the way the model is responding, maybe adding more and more variations of models, maybe some even complicated RAG use cases. Like we have this company called LexEU.ai. It's a law company that basically integrates different European laws into DocsGPT and have different models, and there are different RAG pipelines. And some of them use like billion tokens, which are successfully being deployed on MongoDB. And we tune embeddings for them. We help them with RAG pipelines. So here we have a lot more interaction, but we also want to have an offering where users can do a lot more self-service.
So a potential customer for DocsGPT, what state should their documentation be in order to begin looking at implementing DocsGPT?
I think if your documentation is in a bad condition, we will probably help you by navigating you through improving the documentation internally, because that will just help everyone out internally. It will help every single developer, every single person interacting with that documentation, because if it's bad, AI will also not be happy with it. But I do not think that it's bad to contact us before the documentation is on a certain level. It's always good to contact us, because the improvements we deliver to your documentation source will transfer to the improvement in AI as well. But overall, I don't think that there needs to be a high level or even good or medium level of quality in your documentation. I think the vector search works really well in general, and the adjustments that you can make with embeddings by substituting them and tuning them are absolutely so powerful that even with bad documentation, it will work.
So how does DocsGPT get access to the existing documentation? Is there, do I need to convert it to PDF, or can I point it at the pages? Is DocsGPT, does it have some HTTP reader? How does it get access to the existing documentation?
There are a few different ways. We can upload documentation. All of it will end up in a vector store, which will be stored in two ways. First, text, so that when we retrieve it, we know the original text. And second way is the embedding, which is the vector. So you will have your database where you have text and your vectors inside the vector store. And then when you upload it, you can upload it physically over the in your chatbot. You can just click upload icon and it will upload there. We can connect it to your SharePoint. We can connect it to your website and scrape the website. There are different integrations. They all link up nicely to the overall system. So there's a good variety of ways to ingest data. But what's important, I think, is the steps that happen when we prepare the data, when we make sure it's readable by the model. Usually we like to stick to the markdown format. So even if we're ingesting HTML, we try to translate it to markdown. And then we would generate embeddings on top of the data and just upload it to our vector store and make sure that we test it with our benchmarks as well.
Yeah. And I imagine there's maybe a long-running job or a cron job that runs that updates on a regular basis. As you update your documentation, you want to make sure that DocsGPT is also updated, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So syncing the data is important. Sometimes what you want is that every single time you have an update in your upstream of documentation, every time somebody pushes an update, you want to update the data set as well. What is good is to have a good vector store that allows you to do decent CRUD operations, because you don't want to update the whole collection. What you want to do is to update it incrementally as it happens. And this way, your updates are much quicker. And if you have a lot of documents, you don't need to wait for hours for it to be re-ingested. And thankfully, to great APIs that are provided by PyMongo and simplicity of it all, it's a really neat piece of code, which is extremely easy to implement.
Yeah. Love PyMongo. So as a founder, and I guess you call you a visionary in this space, I want to ask you a question I've been asking folks. What does the future of software development look like to you?
I think we're moving away from low-level languages to higher-level languages more and more. And I think a lot of people who are currently in no-code space will probably experience a lot of competition that will come in that space with all of the new tools, which basically will allow you to write code with LLMs or integrate certain moving parts with LLMs. And I think the future of software development will still require every single developer to understand basic concepts of how web application works, of how to build scalable systems. And those things will become increasingly more important, I think. That sort of classical understanding of how systems work in general. But what will become less important is memorization of functions, memorization of certain common patterns, and more focus on actually valuable inputs. And that's where I think there was a great example of lawyer wages in New York. back in 1994 to 1997, basically the group of lawyers who were sort of getting 1 million salary, and when it was normally distributed. And then after introduction of databases, people could perform search on a database and find old cases, old examples for them to build a strategy. So what changed is now you have 2 peaks on your normal curve. And basically a group of lawyers who are very experienced and they understand strategy, and a group of lawyers who can just help and assist with retrieving simple information. And I think the same thing is going to happen in tech with developers. Is a lot developers will companies will value that far end a lot more. Those people have the experience of building complicated systems, because they will be able to deliver a lot more value a lot quicker with fewer resources. And I think we will see that double peak in developer space as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So any advice for developers looking at this bold new world with AI in it?
I think it shows one thing is that you have to learn basic concepts, and you have to learn slightly more advanced and complex concepts. And maybe it's more important to understand concepts and paradigms than it is to understand a singular language.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Alex, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you for taking time to join me. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we begin to wrap up?
The final thing that I wanted to share is just that productionalizing LLMs. We have a great example with this pharma company called No Deviation, where for them, the main concern was always security. And the advice I will have is that if you want to tackle that security pain point, it's critical to use open source tools in your tool belt, and it's critical to use open source LLMs. And the sooner you start using those tools, the quicker you will learn how to adopt them in production.
That's great advice. We're going to include links in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about DocsGPT, check the show notes. There's a handy link, mdb.link/DocsGPT. Will take you to a blog article where you can learn more. There'll be links to the platform itself. Thanks, Alex. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you so much. It's been great having